Okay, I'd like to recognize that we were in executive session. I'd like to reconvene our regular meeting at this time. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda for this evening?
Yes.
Can I have a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. As we do at the beginning of all of our meetings and at the end, to ensure the public's right to be heard, we look for any comments from the public that we may have. Seeing none, I'd like to remind folks that they have the opportunity to email us at boe@wilton.k12.ct.us. Just rolls off the tongue.
Sure did.
And we will move on to the consent agenda. Has everybody seen the consent agenda? Has anybody seen it?
Has anybody seen it?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Wonderful. At this point, we move on to reports and recognition. The board chair's report is relatively short this evening. I want to remind everybody that the WEF Spelling Bee is coming up on November 16th. There are still hives to be had. I know Kimber Felton has been running around town like a very busy bee, getting hives in order. For those of you who are terrible spellers, as I am, I have an out because it's my wife's birthday, and she said that was not a suitable way to spend the evening. But you can buy EpiPens, so if you can't spell well, you can buy EpiPens to get people to help you to spell. You just can't win around that way. That same day, your Board of Education will be up in Mystic at the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education Conference. It is our primary professional development event for the year. And our first selectman asked us to remind everybody when they use the fields in town to please make an effort to take your water bottles and your trash off the field and move them into the trash receptacles that are available. And then lastly, some of you in town may have noted that your board has started a new program or a new series of articles called Notes from the Board Table. They will show each week every other week in the Villager as well as on Wilton Patch, and they'll be posted on the Board of Ed website. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know as well. Dr. Richards?
Good evening. Julia reported a nice item called Teen Read Week. In honor of Teen Read Week, this year Middlebrook students participated in an annual Pass Along a Good Book program. This is in the past, Middlebrook students have been very generous in their donations to our annual book drive. This year was really no exception. The students donated a grand total of 2,360 books to the School Volunteer Association of Bridgeport. Middlebrook chose this particular organization because the books go directly in the hands of students less than 20 miles away from Wilton. The 8th grade students were pivotal in helping to collect, box, and count the books. When the representatives from the School Volunteer Association arrived earlier this week, they were thrilled by the students' generosity. So I congratulate Middlebrook on that. I would say that my spouse would say that I have 2,360 books that are on my bedside table, but could be volunteered too. So, but well done. I received an announcement. I just got it today from Molly, got it in the mail. We entered in the CABE Communications Award competition. CABE each year prior to the conference that Mr. Likely referenced, there is a request for submission of budget documents, other kinds of communications from school districts, and there's a competition. Well, we decided to submit the budget super graphic that Matt and Tim and Ken and Amy Korn put together last year. And I'm pleased to announce that we received honorable mention for that. Well done. It's a terrific document, and it's really gotten great reception in our community. And we're already, Tim and Matt and Ken have already been talking about what this year's graphic will look like. So I really applaud their work. Third thing I wanted to share with you tonight is has to do with commissions, committees, and task forces. And as you know, There's a great deal of work being done in Connecticut in response to legislative mandates, in response to the Common Core work that Mr. Candy has talked about on several occasions, and we'll continue to be talking about as we're doing a lot of work in that area in all the schools. And CAPS, the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, has created some committees in support of this work. There's also, as you know, CAPS has been working on a plan that they've referred to as the transformation of the Connecticut educational system. And so there's a lot of work that's going on around the state. And I wanted just to quickly share some of the committees, because I think it speaks to parts of the initiative that are underway. There's one committee called the PEAK Committee. We love acronyms, as you know, in education. The Performance Evaluation Advisory Committee. And this group is really, you'll be hearing more about this, it's advising on the implementation of the mandated changes in teacher evaluation and administrator evaluation. Jane and Tim and I have gone to workshops, Julia, on this, and there will be a lot more work to do as we work to put forth an evaluation plan for our district that will be accepted by the state. So you'll hear more of that in future months. The position of this group that this group has taken is to try to make sure that whatever process emerges is based in fairness, that it ensures a link between teacher and administrator evaluation and student achievement, and that it ensures that adequate training is provided to evaluators. So we'll be, again, we have a lot of work. Our roundtable, Tim has and I have been meeting and will be meeting more with principals. We call it the roundtable, and one of our major items on this discussion will be the work that we need to do to be prepared to submit our plan to the state sometime in March. Another group, and I'm going to forgive me for some editorial comments, it's called the Red Tape Committee, or Mandate Reductions. And the board, I know, is I'm constantly talking, and board members are talking about the number of mandates. The major objective of this committee is to identify duplicative, superfluous, or outdated mandates and associated reports. Some specific objectives of the committee include the identification requirements that only need to be focused on schools in the Governor's Alliance or network or other identified schools in need of improvement. One of the criticisms that many of us have had is that Connecticut Assembly passes, one-size-fits-all laws, and our view on some of these things is they really should put forth legislation if they're trying to solve a problem and focus the attention where there is a problem. And some of the mandates may fit this bill. Some of them are just unnecessary, and I think it's maybe a quixotic battle that we're in, but to try and reduce the number of red tape requirements that don't help further teaching and learning. The third committee is EPAC, the Educator Preparation Advisory Committee. The role of this group is to try to look at on teacher preparation in Connecticut. The legislature has responsibility for the state institutions, and there are state credentialing laws that all teacher preparation programs must follow. And this committee is going to be looking at proposals on competency-based certification, more extensive pre-certification clinical experiences, and clear guidelines on cooperating teachers and the qualifications for being a cooperating teacher. So we're trying to look at how do we, professional development is extremely important in any district, but we also want to make sure that the pre-service experiences of teachers as they achieve their license are up to speed. The next group is what's called the ECS Task Force. I've been working in Connecticut now for about 20 years, and conversations about the issue about educational cost sharing have been going on for, it seems, 20 years. And I think they continue. This group is going to be looking at how do we fund education in Connecticut. And should there be some municipal relief from funding costs of education. It's a shift, arguably, to the state, but we want to also look at how that, if there is going to be a shift to the state, how do districts like ours, how do we receive some assurances that we are not, it's not going to be a total Robin Hood kind of a situation. Communities that are less fortunate than ours, as Ken has pointed out, and you all know, receive a lot more grant money than districts like ours. So it's an attempt to look at educational funding, and it's a very complex, as you might imagine, area. Another committee is the Achievement Gap Task Force, to look at what are the things that can be done to reduce Connecticut's sizable achievement gap between the districts like ours and the Bridgeports, New Havens, Hartfords, and other districts that are struggling. Another group that is being supported is a group called Cost Effectiveness Through Regionalization, and to look at ways that districts may combine in some regional cooperatives. We, as you know, have been working with Matt and his counterparts in Weston and Ridgefield in the area of technology. Are there other opportunities that we could use through some forms of regional cooperation? The last two groups, one is going to function, and Tim's alluded to this in the past, high school graduation requirements, to look at, there's a sense that there's going to be a move for even greater performance-based achievement measures that will determine high school graduation. So that is very much going to be in play, I think, in the future years, and we're looking at that very carefully. Finally, there's one that's kind of a strange name, but it's the State Leadership Team - State Personnel Development Grant. And this goal is to try to look at implementing a model, integrated model of literacy instruction and behavior supports to promote academic achievement of all students. The core here is, and we've been, as you know, literacy has been front and center in this district for 9 years. I've been working here and long before that. So it will, but I think will be achieving a clear emphasis in all districts with this work that's ongoing. So as you can see, there's a wide array of really demanding and complicated and interrelated challenges in this state, and time is going to tell whether the agenda before us is attainable within the timelines that exist, or if this is, or if it is realistic or unrealistic. And I think when we go to CAVE, I think there are going to be a lot of sessions where you will have opportunities to hear a conversation about the initiative. So in my next report, what I'd like to do when we next meet in November is to give you a little bit of an overview on some of the specific initiatives that, big picture way, I promise not long, that we're going to undertake in the coming year. A lot going on.
At this point, we'll move on to committee reports. Laura, anything to mention? Chris? Karen?
Yes. With respect to the restroom renovations at the high school in Middlebrook, at the last meeting I reported that we had done a walkthrough with 5 architectural firms. I'm pleased to report that all 5 firms have submitted a request proposal, and John Murphy and Todd Jagelis from Turner and I have read all 5, and we will be prepared to make some recommendations to the larger committee next week when we meet.
Wonderful, thank you. As far as Wilton Education Foundation, I already mentioned the spelling bee, but I also want to thank them for organizing Read Aloud Day at Miller Driscoll this past week. It's a fantastic event. I've participated in it a couple of times. I believe we had members of the community reading in every single class in Miller Driscoll, and the books were donated by the Village Market, which was just a wonderful gift. We want to thank them for that. With that, we'll move on to our enrollment projections presentation, which we look forward to every year.
We are so blessed, as the board knows, to have support of LNS. who has, in spite of all her work demands and other demands that she has in her life, has been willing to help us come up with projections that are of critical importance to us as we begin our budget season, because they really are a key driver as thinking about what we're going to need in terms of staffing and in terms of planning. So we're so pleased you're here.
Thank you.
If
Thank
only
you.
we could use that crystal ball in the stock market.
I would love that.
She's great.
I'd put it on Amazon and sell it. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, Dr. Richards. I am pleased to be here tonight presenting the district enrollment projections for the 2013-2014 school year. It's very difficult for me to believe that another year has come and gone. It always takes me by surprise when I have to start doing this all over again. Of course, before I begin, I want to remark that these projections are just simply not possible without the help I get from two people. The first is Molly Rollison, who provides me with the district figures as well as answers all of my questions. Although some of them might seem inane to her, she is so responsive and gets back to me immediately. So thank you, Molly. The second person I'd like to thank is Mary Channing. Mary is responsible for the preschool census, and I'm sure you can imagine it must be very difficult trying to get some handle on all the preschoolers out there doing preschool things. So I greatly appreciate that she does that, and I want to thank both of them for their invaluable help. Well, October 1st is generally a regular day for most people, but to me it's enrollment day. That's the day I get the figures from Molly on what our school enrollment is. And I immediately drop everything I'm doing, run to my computer, and start inputting everything. I'm happy to say, even though I am so angst when I put those numbers in, so far so good. And it's really because of the typical model we use and have used over the years to develop these enrollment figures. And of course, as Dr. Richards mentioned, the objective and purpose tonight is to provide enrollment figures that are going to be used as a basis for developing our school budget. The method we use to do this is called the cohort retention method. Simply put, we're just measuring the pluses and the minuses of a class as they move through our school system. And then this is all historical data that I'm using to accomplish this, and then we take averages and apply them to what we think will be the incoming classes next year. Kindergarten is similarly calculated using the preschool census, which is so important, as well as the historical data that we glean from the computations that we use. And you don't need to worry. I'm going to be working through these numbers with you, and I also want to point out you don't need to try to recall that college statistics that you took. This is just simple arithmetic. So you will be very pleased as we go through to find that you can understand this. Okay? Of course, as I mentioned, my focus is primarily on the children who were already born. For children who are not yet born, I relied upon a 2008 report that was prepared by Dr. Prouda, and his kindergarten figures come into play in 2017 and 2018. His computations are really out of my scope of capability. He uses regression analysis, utilizing birth rate, population trend, and fertility, and those are just simply not something I'm capable of doing. Then the 2019 and 2020 kindergarten enrollment was calculated using raw data, and it was simply the Wilton's projected population in those years and then taking the birth rate per thousand in order to come up with those. Again, it's very easy to think that we're going to be looking at those numbers and they're set in stone. They're not. The further out we go, the less reliable, if you will, particularly that kindergarten figure becomes. So I really think that we need to focus primarily on that next year's enrollment. And then as we go out further, perhaps not as much stock in those figures as we go along. But it's good to see, so we have some sense of where we're trending, where we're heading. Then what I want to mention is that my presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first, which is going to be the easiest part, is the calculation of what we call migration on the diagonal. Part 2 is the calculation of the entering kindergarten. And this part is a bit trickier, and this is a very important calculation because that is going to, the rest of the calculation feeds off of that kindergarten figure. Then I'll pull it all together for you, and you'll see next year's total enrollment projection by individual grade as well as grade group. And then we'll continue to part 3 where we discuss some of the notes based upon the analysis and then variables as to what impacts the enrollment projection. Tonight I have Ken Post assisting me, and he's going to run the PowerPoint while I get to use his laser pointer here. If you have any questions at any time in this, as I go through any of the figures, please just interrupt me so that we can, or ask a question. I need to say interrupt, but please stop me and ask me a question because this model builds upon itself, and I don't want anyone to feel lost as we move along. And I'm here to help you and guide you through the calculations, so please feel free. All right, so Ken, we're up on migration on the diagonal. Okay, what we have here is the beginning guts of what I do when I start this enrollment projection. What I do is I simply promote each child starting with kindergarten in 2007 all the way through to 2012. So for example, and I always use this grade so that I don't get lost as I'm pointing things out. In 2007, the actual historical figure was 315 kindergartners. They moved along to first grade, and we picked up 3 additional students in first grade. Then they moved to second grade, and the number, again, the count was 324, which means we picked up 6 students. And we do this throughout the entire grid. And it's simply just the pluses and minuses as students move through the school system. The next part of this equation is I take all of these net migrations of the students, starting with the kindergarten to first grade, the first grade to second grade, and I average them. And it's at the bottom of this, Ken, but what I do is I add all of these up, and I use a 5-year average, then I use a 4-year average, and then a 3-year average. The reason why we do that and operate it that way is because we don't want to lend credence to any one year in particularly, especially if there's an aberration. If all of a sudden we have, like I think last year we did, where we had a number of students who came to the second, the third grades, and we assumed that perhaps they moved in and the Avalon had just opened. So those things you don't want to give a lot of weight to because they're not going to be happening every year. So once we come up with all of those averages, we put them down here, and this is called migration below the diagonal, below the line. And what this figure is the average migrations that occur, this number right here, that occur for each particular grade. So as children move from kindergarten to first grade, the average number of students we pick up is 14. As students move from first grade to second grade, the average number is 6. And we do that the same with all the various movements from class to class. The other thing that you'll notice is that from 8th grade to 9th grade and then 9th grade to 10th grade, we tend to lose the most amount of students. Generally, the theory behind this is that some students move over to private school and leave the school system. So we tend to see reductions in those particular years. Over here, you'll see that I have a minus 60, and that's what I'm expecting to be the decrease as you go from 2012 to 2013. Now, this 60 is not simply a summary of all of these net migrations here. This 19, I hope you can see that it's a 19. This 19 is actually comes from this minus 60 comes from adding the 19, but then we assume all of those seniors in 2012 graduate, so we'll be dropping 323 students, and then we'll be picking up the kindergarten here. So you'll see this reduction really driven by the reduction in the kindergarten students. Now, we haven't gone over where this 244 comes from, and we're going to do that next. But I want to make sure no one has any questions on how these figures are derived. Again, it's all history. It's all driven by the history. And it has proven to be the best method we have of determining what our enrollment will be the following year. Could you go to now the census and preschool children? Oh, here it is. Okay, once again, we have history. We have in 2003 the birth year, 2004 all the way to 2007. And then we have the actual births. And then in here is the census of those students as the years progress. What we'll notice is that the students who were born in 2003, we assume started school in 2008. And then 2004, we assume they all started in 2009. And you can see essentially what we do is we add 5 to each of these years, because that's the assumption we make, that when they're 5 years old, they'll start kindergarten. Of course, we know there's some holdbacks. Parents feel like their students are not yet ready for kindergarten, and that gets factored into the equation, because what's happening is every year that holdback tends to be either the same or a little bit more, and if in fact it becomes more of a trend, that will be reflected in these numbers as we go through and see the difference from year to year. What happens is during the census, Mary Channing then goes out and says, okay, for all the students born in 2008, we have all of these, this is the most recent count I have. So in 2008, which I expect that these children are going to be entering kindergarten in 2013, I see that my census this particular year is 210 students. Now, you'll see we have this thing called an increase here, which I'll get to in a minute. Then if we go to 2009, you'll see that our census this year was 185 children. And then for children in 2010, our census this year was 145. Then for the births in 2011, the reason why that number seems to be so much lower than our census this year is because it takes a while to catch up on recording births in Wilton. The reason why is a lot of, hopefully, children are born outside Wilton at Norwalk Hospital, Stanford Hospital, hospitals in Bridgeport. So it takes a while for all of that paperwork to catch up, which is why you'll have such a huge difference between the actual births in 2011 and then what the census is in 2012. I guarantee you when we look at this number next year, if I'm here, but anyway, if I look at this next year, we will see that this figure will have gone up. But again, this is driven solely by the census here, and we will be counting those students. Do you think you can get that a little lower so they can see how I come up with this particular number here, the increase? Okay, now, this is called the averages of history, and this is the entering kindergarten year. So, for example, in 2008, when the students entered kindergarten, those were our students that are up here, born in 2003. 1 year out from entering kindergarten, the census had the students at 35 less than the actual kindergarten figure. So what happened essentially is 1 year out, we picked up 35 students from the census into kindergarten. We go through and we do that for all the years, entering 2009, entering 2010, entering 2011, and entering 2012. Okay? Then we do the 1 year out based upon that census figure. Then we go ahead and we also do 2 years out, 3 years out, and 4 years out. This is where you start getting into the less reliability, if you will, in the census. Because if you look here, 4 years out, from the time we had the census to the time the students entered kindergarten, for the students entering in 2008, there were 109 students that we picked up. So, and it's more difficult to nail down pre-K numbers when these children are infants and 1-year-olds. So I just think that it's, when you go out, it's a little less reliable. So what I've done then is once I have all of these figures from when the students entered school and the year they were born, I add them all up. And then here we go again. It's all, like I said, all algebra. You add them all up, and then you take an average based upon this figure. Okay? So when we also have to round, it's important to note students don't come in fractions. So we have to round for all of these numbers. And so we find out that 1 year out from the census to kindergarten, we pick up 34 students. 2 years out from the census to kindergarten, we pick up 52 students. 3 years out, we end up from the time that we have the census till the students enter kindergarten, we have 81 students. And then 4 years out, we have almost 107 students from the time we've done the census till the time they've entered. Can you go up again for me? All right, so now you'll see this is where I got my 34 increase from. That was 1 year out, and that's the average. So this year our census was 210 students. We've calculated from the averages you saw below that 1 year out we have an average of 34 students that we pick up. So we've now decided and calculated that the kindergarten entering in 2013 is going to be 244 students. I go through the whole model and I do it for each individual year from which we have census data, and it's again using those averages from down below. And as I said, you have 113 students that were part of the pre-K census for births in 2011, and there's almost 107 increase from the time they enter kindergarten. But even at that, I mean, the number is lower, 220 versus the 244 this year. But again, we can't put a lot of stock in that number, but we can look at it to say, gee, am we trending lower, or what to expect. It helps with planning overall. So can we go back to migration on the diagonal? Thanks. Here we go. So now you'll see that's where I got my 244 from. What happens now is I've promoted all of these students from 2012 to 2013. I'm assuming that the kindergartners all go to first grade, the second graders all make it to third grade, and so on. So I take the averages of those net migrations, and I take the 269 kindergartners this year and add the 14 increase based upon the migrations I've calculated to come up with a 200, I can't read those numbers, 283 in first grade for this year. Then what we do is we go from 289, we add 6, we'll have 295 second graders next year. And if you go through, we'll have 327 third graders, and this is all projecting based upon history and based upon all of the movements we've had through these grades throughout the years. Are there any questions yet? All right. Let's go to enrollment by grade group, which is important as well. Okay, now we have enrollment by grade group. Again, we have the history up here, which is simply just adding up kindergarten, first and second grade. Then we have third, fourth, and fifth. As you can see, here are all the years. And then what happens is this number is actually, I think it says preschool, right? The preschool. And then what we have is the preschool total. Then we have the out of district that adds, we always assume that that's at 20. I think that over the years we've had plus or minus negligible differences, so we keep that at 20. As you'll see that the preschool census has grown to 75 students, and in fact, based upon May's figure, which is what we use to determine that preschool number, we had 45 students receiving services, and we had 30 students who were peer models. So that figure has been at 75 for a couple of years, and I left it at 75 for 2013. What happens is, again, for 2013, I add up what I saw in the diagonal is the kindergarten through second graders, And you'll see that in some of the schools we have a plus, some of the schools are going down. And I go, in some of the movements between, for example, 9th grade and 12th grade are, it's just small from this year to next year. It's like an increase of 2 students. And you'll see a flattening, I think, generally speaking, of the enrollment. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we haven't had a lot of turnover in Wilton. It's been a depressed housing market. I spoke to a couple of realtors who said that while September was a great month, it's dropped off significantly and has, the spring, the summer have been not as good as they'd like it to be. So I think the reason why our numbers are not only flat here, but why we've been able to come so close, if you will, over the last few years has been a flattening of the housing market. And then, of course, there are concerns about students moving in and out due to private school or parochial school preferences. I don't know if we've seen that trend as much or a difference as much in moving to private school as we would have thought based upon the economy. Can you now move to projection enrollment notes? I just want to make sure I hit upon all of those. Here we go, notes. I'm not going to go through the addendum on methodology because I just went through it with you. And actually, I find it more confusing to read through the methodology than it is to stand up and show you how to do it. As I mentioned before, the state no longer prepares enrollment projections for the town. We did in 2008 contract Dr. Prouda to prepare a long-term enrollment projection for us. And I used his numbers only for kindergarten year 2016 to 2018. And again, as I indicated, for years 2019 to 2020, it's very raw data. But I really don't want to emphasize those years anyway. The students haven't even been born yet, and who knows what's going to happen. I don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone 10 years from now. And again, we use a 5-year average migration to come up with that net migration figure by class, by each individual class. And we also include our practice of just placing more weight on recent years. And what happens is the reason why we do that is because if there is a trend that's starting to occur, we pick that up right away and it gets included in the enrollment projection as we go forward. You'll also note that the projected kindergarten is 244 for 2013, and it's a decrease of 81 students from the highest enrollment I used in my projection of 325 actual kindergartners that were in the school at October 1st, 2008. It should be noted that Connecticut has the 4th lowest birth rate in the nation, and I received that number from Connecticut by the numbers. What's important to know, though, is because we're 4th lowest in the state does not mean Wilton is the 4th lowest. I think you have to take each town standalone, and I would think that Wilton might have slightly higher birth rate than the rest of Connecticut. We do see an overall enrollment projection decrease for 2013, and then, if you had noted, we began a steady decline throughout the next several years. New housing starts were significant increase in real estate transactions could impact this particular projection, but that gets picked up in the forecast and in the projection as we move along. It will get picked up in the net migrations. And then we will start seeing the classes increasing in size if that is the case. One of the things I had said that the real estate transactions are lower and then the market appears a bit soft. I called the building department in Wilton, and there was only 1 permit this year for new housing. So as I said, I think we're very stagnant, which is why these projections have been able to be fairly accurate for the last couple of years. The net migration for overall grades was, for all the grades, was minus 23 this year, and we had a minus 37 the year before. You'll notice that this could be because the projection of what I had for the decline is really going slower. and which is a distinct possibility. And then what we have, although overall enrollment is projected to decline in 2013 through 2020, the net migrations of the classes are at plus 19. But the overall decline, and this is very important, is because the kindergarten is lower. You have to look at each grade, again, standalone, to figure out what is going to impact that particular class. For example, when you look at kindergarten, you have a plus 14 going into first grade, and that's important to remember when you're trying to develop a budget for that particular school and those particular grades. But as I also mentioned before, the cohort retention method will immediately adjust itself to reflect any potential increase or decrease in our model. And that's why we've used this, because history has always been on our side in terms of developing these projections. Can you go to variables, please? Thanks. Here we go. Here are the variables. As I indicated, new housing starts. We only had one permit this year. There was another in the works, but I spoke to, I think it's Rachel at the building department, and she had indicated only one. And then the housing market, as I said, there are more houses on the market. There are a few houses that are vacant, but overall, our market has been depressed in Wilton and has stagnated. But this will be self-correcting, and as time goes on, what will happen is as the market starts turning over and more students come in, we'll be picking them up on the net migrations. Again, the birth rate always factors into this, and I had indicated Connecticut in particular has the fourth lowest birth rate in the nation, but we need to look at that because Wilton might not. Wilton might be a little bit higher. We also need to look at part of the variables, and this is the private and prep school preferences. When the economy first it was troubled in 2008, one of the assumptions and one of the things I was primarily concerned about was that students who had been attending private schools would all of a sudden start coming out and joining the public school ranks. Well, that hasn't been the case, and it's also not been the case with parochial schools. Then, of course, the perceived quality of schools is extremely important when you consider one of the variables of why people would start coming in or out of Wilton. And I know people perceive that we have a high-quality school system. So, I think as things go on, people are going to want it. It's desirable to move here and partake in the school system. And the other trend I did notice was the trend in school-age start times. A lot of people hold children back until they're mature enough or feel that they're capable of attending kindergarten, attending a full-day class, and have the skills they need in order to have a successful kindergarten year. I noticed that in previous years we've had something like 54 children held back before starting kindergarten. This year it was 63. So it seems to be trending a little bit upward, but again, that could just be the composition of that particular population. And if that becomes more of a trend, we will notice it in the kindergarten starts because we will have gone through the historical model and it will have adjusted itself. And then, of course, general economic conditions. And that's just, generally speaking, people moving in, people, deciding to either, educate children at private schools or just, tend to go along with the private school. So those are some of the variables that we need to take into consideration when we prepare this model. And it's just, as you look at the enrollment projection, if indeed you have something where you're going to be having all of a sudden a large influx in a particular grade, you then have to say, oh, look, Ellen said that we were going to have, 250 students, but I happen to know that, 5 people with kindergarten children just moved in, and one of them has quintuplets. So then you'd want to be ready for, an additional almost, 10 students, a little bit more than that. But, so those are the kinds of things that still need to analyze and still need to be reasonable about. But these projections really do provide a very solid base for developing next year's budget. All right, can you move to accuracy now, please? Oh, this is the enrollment projection on one page. Sorry, Ken, I'm going to go back so people can see that. Here we go. What Molly does for me is she just goes through and prepares a grid that shows children who are already in our school system, children born but not yet in our school system. Those are all those pre-K preschoolers, and then children not yet born. So as we go along, we simply pick up the numbers that I showed to you before of what the projections are. So for 2013, we will have kindergartners of 244. First grade it's a little easier to see too than that grid that I have. And then kindergarten first grade is 283, second grade is 295, and so on. You'll see the total amount projected for our school district, and then out of district is that, to come up with a total figure here of 4,274 students in our school district. And then this is just another way of grouping those students. Okay? Any questions? Does anyone have any questions about this? All right, then we move on to accuracy. Here's my favorite part. And I know I've kept all the historical data, and I'm getting closer and closer to the end of being able to use just one page, because this goes all the way back for many years. But last year, I had projected, I think that's the projection, 4,239, and we had 4,225 students come into our system. So that's a difference of 0.3%. But if you look at all the percentages over the years and all, even
Hey,
at
Ellen?
the times,
I'm sorry, I think that was backwards. You projected 4225,
4239,
and we had
do you know,
4239.
I mess that up every year.
We actually had more students this year than we projected.
We projected. Thank you for correcting me.
You're welcome.
And I do. I reverse that every single year.
The taxpayers remember that. So, we need to remind them we have more students than we projected.
That's correct. And so what we have then is I projected 4,225 and 4,239 showed up. What you want to see as time goes on, and this is the column that's important, is you want to see that number essentially come to zero, if you will, because what that means is that our projections are high, just as high as they are low over the years, over the historical trending. So that you really do want to see this number approach almost zero. And, you know, as we go through, like I said, you'll see the highest difference was in 1991 of 4%. But remember, that was when the student population was, you know, 2,705 students. I mean, wow. I mean, we're a far cry from that now. So, you know, that made that particular difference more sensitive to the percentage. So this is why we use this model. It works. It's based on history, and it always absorbs those differences and those trends that come into play, but at the same time it smooths out any aberrations that we might have.
So 20 years ago we had 2,700 students,
Correct.
and now we have 4,239 students.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, very good. So I don't have anything else. Does anyone? And I have to thank Ken. This was unrehearsed. He did exactly as I commanded. He lent me his laser pointer, which I love, and I will give that back to you.
Does anybody have any specific questions? I just have one other question.
Sure.
With the increase in students this year, 14 over what we projected,
Correct.
do you have any anecdotal reason to believe that your projection of 4179 for next year is high or low?
I don't have anything anecdotal. I did take a peek, though, and I have this here. I gave a copy to Molly, and I will give you a copy, all of you a copy as well. I just ran this off very quickly so you could get some sense of where the differences were by grade from my projection to the following. You know what I'm going to do? Yeah, sorry. But take one and pass it around. It was interesting because of the numbers that I felt were the biggest differences. It was from third grade, where I had forecast that we would have 285 students. We had 298 show up, and that was a plus 13. It's a significant number. But then for fourth grade, we dropped off with a minus 8. The next two numbers that I thought should be noted, and even though they're both at the high school, the ninth grade increased from my projection. They were over by 11. But if you look at the 12th grade, which is rather unusual, my projection was higher by 13 students. So, but at the same time, freshmen don't take what seniors take in classes. So it makes a huge difference, even though overall the population in the high school, was very in line with my projection. You have to look at each class standalone. It's critical. You can't say, the whole population's going down by 60, because it's not in every class it's going down by 60. Some are going up, some are going down.
Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Ellen, are you aware of a couple of our surrounding towns whose enrollment projections were way off this year?
As a matter of fact, I do. I read this, talk about an anecdote. Dr. Prouda did the enrollment projections for the town of New Canaan, and I happened to read on the New Canaan patch that his projection for kindergarten that he had made for this incoming class was off by 78 students, and I think that the Board of Ed and the parents were very unhappy with him. Because that's, almost 4 sections.
Just one bad
Right.
calculation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
He was
Too high or too low?
he was too low.
It was too low.
Yeah, so 78 extra kindergartners showed up. Yeah. I think it was off, but he uses other factors. We use historical data and stay with the historical data, because I think it provides us the best base. But yeah, that they were not happy. But interestingly enough, Darien and New Canaan have also had a very hot real estate market. They for some reason, their real estate, they've been finding out they had more turnover in houses there than we've had. So that's why we've been able to stay fairly static with our enrollment projections. Yeah, I was kind of happy when I read that, and I thought, there you go.
Any other questions? Again, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, at this point, we move on to Mr. Post's financial report.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As of the end of September, I'm projecting a budget deficit of $411,152. This deficit is entirely due to special education outplacements. This deficit is primarily the result of an increase in the number of mediated legal settlements. Many of these settlements were reached last spring and over the summer, well after our budget had been finalized, which is why we are over budget so early this year. I've met with Ann, and we are working on a system to do a better job of tracking these settlements and projecting our future financial obligations, although having something in place still would not have helped our budget situation. I expect that our excess cost grant funding will be enough to cover this overage, but I won't know for sure until later in the year. Until we get more information on the amount of the excess cost funding that we can expect, we've implemented a partial freeze on spending. The freeze affects some equipment, supplies, and facilities accounts. We'll be filing our initial excess cost claim in December, and I'm hopeful that after we find out the amount of that claim, we'll be able to unfreeze some or all of these accounts at that time. The other potentially volatile category that we always watch very closely is health benefits. For the 3 months ended September 30th, health benefit claims were under budget by $78,711. This figure does not reflect the $461,000 that the board contributed to the teachers' health savings accounts. We'll be receiving an updated claims estimate from Ed Norgard after the end of October, and any adjustments to the year-end forecast will be reflected in next month's report. And the forecasting this year will be a little more challenging for Ed with the teachers on the high deductible health plan, because that will affect the rate and timing of the claims that come in. I'll take any questions you have.
Do you have any questions?
Can you speak in general terms about the reasons for the increase in the special education outplacements?
We've seen an increase since last spring of parents filing for mediation for situations where they don't necessarily agree with our program or agree that our program works for their child, and they will select a school for their child to go to, file for mediation. And since we're required to provide a free and appropriate public education, we go through the mediation and end up reaching agreement usually to bear some or all of the cost of their schooling. And for some reason there was just a large increase in that type of activity since last spring. For example, in a typical summer, Anne might have one mediation, and she had 8 this past summer.
There was a cough. You said 8?
8.
And that's unusual. Is that
Yes, it's
unprecedented?
unusual.
So we don't know.
Don't know if it's a trend or just an
Right,
aberration.
what's the trend? We don't know.
So you're saying that there's really no way that we could have foreseen this?
Correct.
Do you know if any of our counterpart schools had similar spikes in mediations and things?
I believe they have. Our attorneys have worked for some other neighboring districts, and they have seen an uptick in
So it's not
activity
unique
there.
to Welton?
No.
And have we seen similar variances like this in the past? In other years where you've had to come to the board and say, it looks like the special education budget or this other budget is off at this point?
No, not this early in the year.
Sometimes health benefits has caused us, but not
Right.
necessarily.
Right.
Sometimes, after a couple months, our experience
Right.
may be aberrational.
And is it possible that there'll be other cases in the course of the school year? Or
Certainly is possible. I believe many of these were not necessarily on our radar before all this happened.
To remind the public, our excess cost grant that the town received because of our special education budget this past spring was how much?
It was a little over $1 million.
Okay. It's good to note that that gives us somewhat of a shock absorber for part of our budget that we really have no control over.
Right.
Perhaps it's something for us to talk to the town about. I understand in talking with our legal counsel that other towns have set up funds to adjust for this kind of shock. It might be something for us to consider talking to the Board of Selectmen about. Any other questions?
I had a question just about the partial spending freeze on the other accounts.
Yeah.
Is there anything that is of concern to you or the administrators, anything that's being frozen at this time?
A couple of administrators have expressed some concerns.
Matt's face. I was just wondering if there was any specific things that you're most concerned about as a result of this freeze.
No, I'm granting them some flexibility also. If there's, and I know I had a conversation with one principal today that there were certain workbooks in the textbook account that just hadn't been ordered yet that they need to do the next unit or whatever. And I said, if you can find the money somewhere else in your budget, I'll let that go through. So we do allow them some flexibility. And I'm hoping and expecting that when the excess cost comes out, it'll be enough to cover whatever our shortfall is, and we can release the accounts.
Any other questions? Ken, thank you very much. At this point, we're going to go on to the fiber project overview, and that'll be presented by Dr. Richards, the most technical man in the room. That'll be presented by Matt and Ken.
Before we begin, I just wanted to thank some people. John Severese and Sandy Denny's are here. They've been part of the original steering committee for the project, I'd also like to thank Laura Schwem, who is on the current townwide fiber committee. And Ken's going to start by giving a little bit of background about the project, and then I will walk you through the benefits of the project.
And we won't consume too much of your time. Our purpose here really is to, since you've gotten copies of all the reports and information that we've shared with you, we'll talk a little bit and then answer questions and facilitate a discussion about the project. In the spring and summer of 2011, the town became aware of Yankee Gas's intention to deliver natural gas through the center of Wilton. With Yankee Gas digging up the roads to install their lines, it would offer the town an opportunity to install conduit under the roads. The town, library, and schools formed a steering committee at that time to explore the possibility of installing a shared fiber network. Since that time, 2 separate studies have been conducted by outside organizations, BVH and Bloom Shapiro. Both studies explored multiple options, including leased fiber and public internet and cloud services. Both studies recommended that the town pursue the installation of an underground, redundant shared fiber network. The total cost is estimated at about $1.7 million. It should be noted that if Yankee Gas was not already opening up the roads, the estimated cost of the project would be approximately $1.3 million higher. And Matt will go over some of the benefits to the town and the schools, and then we'll answer your questions.
The shared data link is the proposed name should this make it onto the capital bonded projects. It represents a sound investment in the digital assets of the town. The underground fiber connection will benefit the schools and the town and the library. Underground fiber, as you can imagine, we're all sort of holding our breath about this Frankenstorm that might be brewing out. But underground fiber really is a superior option for carrying your fiber on it rather than the poles, especially in a town like Wilton. It's superior availability and reliability because obviously you have to worry about trees or vehicles sliding through snow, slamming into telephone poles, knocking it down. What the project would allow immediately for us is, for the schools, is to take our critical backups off campus. Obviously, the farther away and the more securely that you can have your backups, the better. This would really provide both. It would give us a good distance from our campus and a real secure fashion to have our backups. But more than that, it really gives, it beefs up the actual infrastructure of the schools by providing more fiber between the buildings, between the sites and the core switch right below us. That separate fiber connection is so important because even a fiber connection, even though it is more reliable, can be dug up. We've had our fiber dug up 3 times over the years. And in a case where you have Miller Driscoll, where we drop off only 1 pair, 2 little fibers, it would really provide a much more robust connection from Miller Driscoll to us. Another feature is that it allows us to avoid having to pay for hosting those solutions. So we have the ability right now to have a company like Digital Back Office host our backup solution, but that if you add up the cost over time, that would be around $576,000 over 20 years. And we would own nothing after that. And that's assuming that the electrical rates don't change. I really doubt over 20 years that our electrical rates will stay the same. So our rack fee would probably go up over those 20 years. It creates a secure high-speed connection between our video security system and the police. And I know the police are anxious to have a connection to the security system that we've set up. It allows the town entities to function remotely in the case of a disaster. That's part of our kind of next phases of the plan. But what that would mean is that should a tornado, worst case scenario, wipe out the police station.
No.
locally wipe out the fire department and the police department. They could actually run their facilities here at the schools. We could make a room for them, or in the library. It also offers the possibility of us sharing computer systems. It may not make a huge amount of savings, but if we have incremental savings over time, it will make us more efficient, and those lots of little savings can add up. But it's not primarily a cost savings, but it does make us a leaner operation. And obviously, thinking about the Frankenstorm coming, should there be a massive power outage in town, it allows the library to be a daytime command center for really distributing that information out to the town. It provides a generator backup so that townspeople could go there, get internet, charge their phones, and really kind of serve as a daytime command center for people so they can really gather information for the town. It is an investment. It does cost money, but we really believe that this is a sound investment, that we live in a digital world, that we are so reliant on the technology and our systems, and by having that ability to share the systems underground on a fiber network really makes the town, the library, and the schools better prepared now and better prepared in the future.
Questions?
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me that will the connection between Town Hall and this building be underground? Will they be trenching Route 7?
It won't be coming. Part of it will be. There will be, for every site, there will be 2 connections. So one connection will be coming up through the roads where the gas feed that comes to the schools, to our furnace here. Another, what they call a redundant loop, would go back, and that would be on the poles. So there is a little piece on the poles, but the piece that is on the poles is on Route 7 where there are really no trees. It's going center of town. It's not out off in the woods.
But lots of cars to hit those poles.
Yes, there are lots of cars to hit those poles.
So we get the redundancy by going from here to the library to Town Hall if the connection between here and Town Hall isn't working.
Right, so everybody has two connections, so if you sever one, the traffic on the network can reroute around the web.
And that's probably one of the reasons why you need to increase the bandwidth, so that to accommodate that extra traffic.
Yes.
How are the schools connected today?
The schools right now have underground fiber that go through conduit from here up to Comstock and then to the 2 schools that are on School Road. We also have a line that goes down Route 7, across Cannondale, up the train tracks, under the Route 7, under the bridge, and up Wolf Pit Road. And there it drops off of Wolf Pit Road, and that's where we have the only 2 fibers.
Okay.
And that has been cut. Well, we've had two dig-ups. We had one dig-up over in the fields, and we had one dig-up on Catalpa, and we had one dig-up on Route 7 over the years. One severing, one where we lost Millard Driscoll for 2 days completely.
Those cables at any risk from flooding? I mean, that seems
the way they're designed, and you probably didn't read through all the technical specs, but the BVH, BVH's expertise is in engineering, and so they build contingencies for that. So it is designed to withstand being underground. So
no, I'm talking about the existing.
Yeah, the existing one as well. Fiber is a very resilient to many things except bending, because it's made of glass. So if you have a fiber optic phone cable, don't bend.
Matt, the proposal that you're presenting to us tonight is identical to the one that BVH proposed last year. which has been revalidated by Bloom Shapiro. Last year, when it was presented to the town as the BVH proposal, there was a lot of members of the community who were concerned, a lot of people who, this is their business, said, it's too expensive, cheaper ways to do it, better ways to do it. Just a lot of people seem to have, to me, who this is not my thing, seem to know what they were talking about. And at the time, I thought all those people were going to be allowed to weigh in on it and maybe figure out if there were other options. So I was a little surprised that the Bloom Shapiro was just, yes, we're going to take BVH and represent it.
Well,
were those people contacted, I guess is my question.
In the aftermath of it being pulled off the budget, the tri-boards decided to form a committee to further research based on that kind of feedback. So they wanted to make sure that they did their homework, and that's the committee that
But were
Laura
those
said.
members of the community consulted? The ones who wrote letters to the editor, called the first selectman?
I don't know.
Can Sandy speak to that?
Sure. I sit in the sidelines of that committee.
No, if I may, there's going to be a public comment session held November 14th at 7:30 in meeting room, I believe it's B. The Townwide Network Committee, following that public comment meeting, will decide on what their recommendation is to the Board of Selectmen to move the project forward or not. If people would like to submit written testimony as opposed to doing it that evening, they can do so to me, and I will forward it on to the full committee. And the notice that will go out to the community that meeting is on the 14th will appear in the newspapers next Thursday.
Thank you.
We should get that into our notes from the board table as well.
But I want to clarify that the Bloom Shapiro study wasn't just to take the BVH and validate it or not validate it. I believe they were given the same charge. These are what our goals are. What's the best solution? And they had the BVH report as one of their resources, but they didn't just look at that.
Can you talk briefly, we've heard anecdotal news around town that schools don't currently have a backup system at all. This will provide a backup system. Could you please correct that perception?
Yes. We back up multiple ways. We have a software device that backs up the entire system every night, and we also have a fail-safe hard drive that backs up everything to a massive array, storage array. So we have two systems, but what the Blum Shapiro recommends is that fail-safe one, that we move that away from our servers, because should the building beneath us blow up, a boiler explosion, that would make it a very difficult recovery of our data. So I didn't mean to be blunt, but that's the, and we are working on that too. We did take the Blum Shapiro report very seriously, and we are working to come up with a solution. But everything comes at a cost, and that will be a forever cost.
Right. One of the other comments that people have made is that we ought to be looking at putting all of this back up out on the cloud. I understand you've given us some information here that says that that's probably not as cost effective as people think it is.
Well, it is cheaper. The cloud will always be cheaper, but it doesn't mean better, and it doesn't mean the best secure. What Blum Shapiro did was give us a risk assessment, and they outlined why they chose this is a better option than the cloud. The cloud is cheaper. I cannot tell you any different. But the cloud also requires that you have a high-speed link. And even with the high-speed link, if you're talking about massive amounts of data, our whole system, say almost 3 terabits of data, to download that from an internet connection and then rebuild servers would take weeks. And I can't explain how I could even begin to estimate the loss of all of our data for several weeks in the school system. It'd be
Terabytes, not terabits.
Yes, it'd be catastrophic to lose.
Okay.
To lose that kind of time, but it can be done, and it also requires that we don't at all lose our internet connection. So if we lost our internet connection, we can't even retrieve that backup.
So will the generators that are proposed in this system keep the fiber lit during a disaster?
Yes. And, there are several levels that we can consider how we could back up. What we would immediately plan, obviously, is just to back up so we could rebuild our servers. The next phase is once we get to the point where we've virtualized our servers, we can take the critical operations that we need so we can function and mirror them so that they can operate remotely, whether at the town or the library. And then we could actually, given a local disaster here, set up and run anywhere on the network.
So we have a generator proposed at the library, one proposed at Comstock through a different project, and one already in place at... Is it already at Comstock?
Yeah, they're working on it.
And one already in place at Miller Driscoll. Will they work in concert?
Yes.
We may have additional questions as a board. It'd be all right that we submit those to you?
Of course, absolutely.
I have one right now about the difference between option 1 and option 2. Option 1, it says all new fiber and fully redundant. Option 2 says it reuses some laterals between the schools, is fully redundant, but has significantly fewer fibers. Why can't you add the additional fibers that you need in with the existing fibers?
Not enough space in the pipes. The pipe runs that we have already are have already been filled with data.
Okay.
Matt, would you say that this project is a must-have for the schools, or is it more of a nice-to-have category?
Or someplace in between?
Well, I guess I'm going to go with someplace in between. I don't say it's a must-have, but I also want you to realize that an opportunity like this does not come. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because almost since I've been here, we've been trying to figure out a way to get more fiber to Miller Driscoll, and it would just be cost prohibitive to do because of my fears of that connection. We just haven't been able to find a way to do it, and I'm not really that comfortable spending that kind of money to lease fiber on a pole. Some of the things about writing out a disaster recovery plan, those are a must-do for us. We have disaster recovery. We just haven't formalized it in a written down form where someone could just grab it and go should something happen to our critical personnel. I would say, though, it's more than just a nice to have, though. I think that this opportunity really is such a good investment for the town. If you think about how critical, police reports aren't done on a typewriter anymore. Every bit of every operation in the town and the library and the schools is a digital operation. And this is an opportunity to protect that and to really enhance it. And
as we go through time,
I think
it's going to be more and more.
Much more than a nice to have.
We'll be more and more reliant on systems and digital assets.
You
So
mentioned...
that raises a question, will there be an expansion capability here?
Absolutely, because the conduit won't be full. We're going to leave one of the pipes empty,
Okay.
so that we have that ability. We have the infrastructure that we could, pull more fiber if we need it in the future, or whatever the next thing is, if there is a next thing.
You mentioned the term leasing fiber on a pole, and when we were talking about the redundancy, you also mentioned that part of the redundant run will run on poles down Route 7. Does that mean that we'll still be leasing fiber on the pole when this is implemented?
No, we actually own the space on the pole,
Okay.
so we'll run that. And we actually checked that out. That was one of the reasons the original BVH report was a little off. They were very conservative in their estimates, and we were able to remove some of the money because they were paying for right away on
Yeah.
the poles that we didn't need, we discovered to our happiness that there was plenty of space on those poles to run our own fiber.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is just a quick question. The number of 576,000, is that multiplying the yearly cost by 20? Or was there more involved with that?
No, that was it.
That was it.
Okay, all right.
It was pretty simple math. But again, that's
Right.
assuming that electrical rates stay
Yeah,
the
assuming
same
the
for
rates
the
stay the
next
same as
20
now.
years.
Well, right, no, I understood that
Yeah.
part. And then, so that's about, like, not quite $29,000 a year. Where would that fall in the school budget if we were, let's just say, in an alternate universe where you were?
It would be an annual cost in the technology contracted services budget.
And so what's your committee's process now? I mean, you're going to have this meeting in November. and then what are
November
the next-
14th at 7:30 in Room B will be a public information.
Mhm.
It's not my committee, it's
My-
Slowick's committee.
It's our committee. It's the town's
It's Lois's
committee.
committee.
It's the town's committee.
Yes. And then ultimately, for the selectmen to decide whether or not they want to do this? So they're
Right,
not
the
going to be
committee's gonna
asking
make the
us to vote
recommendation.
yay or nay on this. They're not, it's the selectmen's decision whether or not to go forward.
As it is with any capital project,
Right. And then it'll be, if they go forward with it, on the ballot in May,
or sooner.
Call a special
or
meeting.
sooner. Okay.
Because if we do go forward with it, we want to be ready when Yankee Gas
Right.
starts the project.
And so ultimately, it's the town's decision.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, any other questions for now? Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this point, we move on to action items. And Mr. Canty and Mr. Post are here to discuss budget assumptions. And they're on the agenda for discuss and approve.
Well, the board in its review of the document will find that we made the two recommended changes to the first being to the language of the extent to which we provide funding to the Board of Education policies and practice. And then we did respond to the board's request to broaden the language in the last bullet around cost containment to reflect a wide range of opportunities we pursue to be efficient in our practice.
Thank you, those were my suggestions.
The only other comment I would make is to reaffirm the extent to which this document, to a large extent, reflects last year's overview of budget assumptions, with the exception of the additional language around providing resources to meet the social and emotional needs of students.
Any questions? A motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. We move on to Policy 5141, Health Services. It's on the agenda for discuss and approve. Good evening, Ms. Anderson.
Good evening.
How are you?
My apologies for not having more this evening. More policies, but I promise I'll be
More
back.
next time.
Well, not next time. I got a couple of things in between. It's a short time between our next board meeting, but there will be more. I did. The three that are before you this evening are ones that we presented and that I presented and discussed with the board last week, because it was a more lean board last week in its size of members. You did not want to move forward. Just numbers, sheer numbers, nothing about your statures. It was.
I know I need to.
It's not about you, Gary. I'm sorry.
I had for dinner with Subway.
Would you like to do over, Jane?
Because there were fewer of you here last week than there were this week. I should just stick to my plain language. I'm much better that way. So if there are questions, I'll certainly be happy to go through them. I don't know how many questions there may be.
In looking at this first one.
Yes, Health Services Program.
Yes, I don't see any track changes on it. Are there specific
Yes.
changes you want to note?
Sure. So probably the biggest change in this policy is that in the third paragraph, there is no longer what's a good way? In the previous policy, schools had 30 days by which they could allow students to enroll prior to them receiving all of their vaccinations and immunizations and updates. That language has been removed. It was removed from the state statute. It's no longer acceptable. And so we are updating the policy to reflect that and to put us in compliance with the state. And as well, in the fourth paragraph, there is additional language that just refers to the section of the state statute, 19A-7F, which is really the listing of all of the required vaccinations. And so this way, it just prevents us from having to do this dance every year.
So in essence, you're not admitted to the public schools unless you've had all the vaccinations
Correct.
required by that statute.
Correct. You got it.
Other questions? Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. We now move on to 5141.11.
Okay. And as I said last week, but I will say certainly again, that I think it's pretty exciting to be able to present this policy because life has changed drastically for people and students and staff who unfortunately have come down with the HIV or AIDS disease, syndrome. So we now treat it very differently than it was in 1992 when this policy was last revised and reviewed. We no longer, we know now that there is no risk of transmission through casual contact to other persons in a school or school athletic setting. Therefore, this classification or these people who are afflicted with this disease do not need to make anyone aware that they have contracted the disease. Therefore, the school or the district does not have the right to ask, nor would we want to ask, if someone does have this syndrome or disease. And so therefore the language in the policy just speaks to that we will not know, we will not ask, and we will conduct our business as usual.
Questions? Motion approved?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. 5141.27.
It's a little less exciting, but still kind of interesting, I guess, and it's modern day technology that we have the ability now to be able to help save lives.
Exciting if you're
You know, if you're the one having the heart attack, it's pretty good for you, right?
It's exciting if you need it and it's not there.
Yeah, no, that's even more problematic. So the language in this contract, there really was no change in the language that was presented from the previous contract. I know that last week or the last meeting, Karen had some specific questions about some clarifications, and I provided those. I don't know if there are others who have that.
About the locations.
Yes.
I'm just thinking like at the high school where you can have games going on all the way down close to Cider Mill, all the way up at Allen's Meadow, yet this is located at the field house. Is that mobile? Is it something that, if the baseball team's playing, if the freshman baseball team's playing up at Allen's Meadow and it was needed, does that mean somebody has to run back to the field house to get it? Is that...
I don't know. That's a great question. I can certainly find out.
And what about when they travel to other locations?
No, we do not take it with us.
But we don't know whether or not there's one available in their location where we're playing, right?
Correct. Most schools are equipped with AEDs. So it's kind of become a very standard piece of equipment for school
But
districts.
they're not portable. I don't
No, but we don't take it on the bus with
portable.
us.
Well, I don't think that you have, any given day, how many teams playing. I don't.
Right. I think it's a
Right.
permanent
Yeah.
location.
I don't
I would
believe
defer to
schools move
the
those
high school
around.
staff.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's in the field house.
And always locates itself in the field house. It's not on a cart. I think it's usually in the walls, kind of like a fire extinguisher box.
Are there-
That's how it's usually kept.
So you would
Ambulances
have to
at some
deal
of our
with
sports?
the delay.
Yes.
There would be a delay.
Mm-hmm.
You probably call 911 for the
Right.
field.
You would call 911 first, yes,
Yeah.
but I just know like in Little League, in a lot of Little League teams, there's been the push towards having that equipment at every game.
Is that right?
Yes, across the country, Little League organization has done that.
Any other questions? Motion approved?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Future business. The timeline is, of course, listed on the district website. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 5th. That's a Monday. That is a special meeting, and it's to discuss the district testing report. After that, it's November 20th, and that's a regular meeting as well. It's a Tuesday, and that's to discuss the financial report, strategic school profiles, and the class size report. As we do at the end of every meeting, we look for comments from the public, if there are any. Seeing none, I'd like to remind everybody that they can send comments in through the Board of Ed email alias, and please look for notes from the board table, both on Patch and also on the website, and Village Villager.
You need a motion.
I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everybody.